Welcome to 10 Minute Magic, a weekly format covering news in the world of Magic the Gathering in 10 minutes or less. I am Joseph Dunlap.
And I'm Joe Butcher, setting in for Ben Cotty, and this is what's going on in Magic the Gathering this week.
As a follow-up to his article from last week, Brian Bronduin wrote an article on Monday called Draws and Concessions, a Better Alternative. We are still talking about this. He starts out by addressing the strongest counter-argument, which is that his original proposal, making draws the same as losses, aka 0 points, simply treats a symptom rather than the overall problem of collusion. So he follows up by suggesting a better solution, which would be what many have said is the most difficult solution, which is simply make intentional draws and concessions against the rules at higher levels of play such as REL events. The following day, he wrote a Facebook post addressing the other common responses that he received, because in his article he only listed the good responses, the ones that were constructive, and then on his Facebook post he addressed the less constructive responses, such as, I like collusion. It's unenforceable is one that I've been saying for a while. It's hard to, but I guess if you go down that road, it's not impossible. And then other things is, what about casual events like F&M or pre-releases? And then, it's not a big deal, is one of the other common responses he got. So he discusses two commonly suggested alternatives to his own solutions, which is you could opt out of even playing your final one or two rounds if you're locked for top 8, which would result in 1 or 2 free buys, and that's a little bit odd, or changing the actual tournament structure, which is nearly impossible. So if you want to see more about what Brian Bronduin has said in his responses to all the feedback that he's received, you can check out his Channel Fireball article. You can go to his Facebook note. You can go to his Twitter status that he linked, and those will all be in the link dump below. If you were on YouTube or Manaleak, if you're on Twitter, then just go check out channelfireball.com and you will find it.
Okay, continue. Earlier this week, Mark Rosewater revealed some pretty important information about the way that double-faced cards are going to appear in Shadows of Innistrad, certainly in the booster packs at least. So on his Blogatog, he was asked about the ratio of packs that will receive a second double-faced card and what rarity this would occur at. Mara replied that this was the first double-faced card, which appears in all the booster packs, will either be a common or uncommon, and that replaces a normal common card in the pack. So 1 in 8 booster packs will also have a second double-faced card, replacing an uncommon, and will either be a rare or a mythic, which, Joseph, you'll probably agree, sounds like a pretty fair trade. The community discussion on Reddit pointed out that there is a possibility of opening Sorin, Arlincord, and Avacyn in the same pack, assuming one of the double-faced packs cards is a foil. The drafting and coming across such a bomb like this one described, and some explained that their local game stores had allowed players to purchase a replacement pack when this happens, rather than just be forced to leave the draft to keep the booster they just opened, which I guess is fair enough. It's not the policy of all stores, but doing so allows drafts to continue with all 8 players, such as when players opened Expeditions, or back in the day, Zendikar Treasures. I unfortunately wasn't around for that.
While the majority of the Magic community is looking forward to the Shadows over Innistrad pre-release, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, there are many of us who are also looking forward to Monday's Banned and Restricted List announcement. Will Eye of Ugin or Eldrazi Temple finally see the Banhammer in Modern? Will Mishra's Workshop get hit in Vintage, as Sam Black was tweeting last week? Are there any more surprises awaiting us Monday? Just to be certain, though, if you are a Puka Trade user, as I am, you might want to double-check your want list so you don't receive any unwanted freshly banned cards. This was a problem when the Splinter Twin ban got leaked ahead of time. People received a lot of unwanted Splinter Twins while they were asleep.
Yeah, I personally got into a pretty sticky situation pre-Dig Through Time and Cruise bannings, where I bought an entire Blue-Red Delver shell a week before these bannings were released, and at the time I didn't follow the banning, so I didn't actually know whether or not it was legal or not. That wasn't really my proudest moment.
That doesn't sound like a very proud moment. It sounds pretty painful.
Yeah, certainly. So, with the release of Shadows over Innistrad, Cancel is finally rotating out of Standard. This might seem pretty insignificant, but this is actually going to be the first time that Cancel will not be in Standard since it was printed 10 years ago. There are, and have always been, better alternatives to Cancel. But with the new block structure and no core sets, we should expect more and more core cards, such as Cancel, to actually be leaving the Standard scene altogether.
Speaking of pre-releases, due to issues with pre-release packs being stuck in customs, Magic players in Brazil will not be able to participate in this weekend's pre-release. Channel Fireball's own Paulo Vitor Dambo da Rosa is among those who will have to sit out the weekend, while Brazil waits for pre-release product to be cleared through Brazil's customs. Brazil's pre-release is tentatively scheduled for next weekend.
April 9th to 10th is actually going to be our first proper look at the brand new standard format, as the Star City Games Open weekend in Baltimore finally showcases these new sets of Shadows of Innistrad. Look out for quite a lot of aggro decks, as well as some revamping of old decks like Green-White Megamorph with Den Protector and the like, as well as decks that kind of almost avoid the rotation entirely, like Eldrazi Red.
And that is the news in Magic the Gathering this week. So moving right along to read some comments on Manaleak.com as we like to do, there's an article that was well received that we also talked about on Draw4 Podcast, which is 8 Great Reasons Why Everyone Needs to Give Pauper Magic a Try by George Moston.
Personally, I can vouch for this being a really, really good article. George and I have worked pretty closely, actually, just recently. But I, as a Pauper player myself, actually seeing this as an introduction to Pauper, it's quite refreshing and actually really inviting to the format. It does sell the format very, very strongly.
Based on what I've seen, I actually very much agree with the first comment we'll be reading here, which is Shane Garvey commenting, "Great article. I cannot recommend enough that people try Pauper. It's kind of like Legacy Light, and I mean that in a really good way. I can totally see where he's coming from. There's a lot of eternal staples in Pauper, and to have those without the bonkers cards like, Jace and Tarmogoyf, Sensei's Divining Top, you get the staple cards just kind of battling it out, and they don't have to worry about anything else overshadowing them. It does kind of feel like a modern or Legacy Light format.
It's also, as the name suggests, it's incredibly cheap to get into, so it's a very good starting competitive format for somebody where you can get a legacy deck and almost move it across to be cheaper, but still actually sometimes just as powerful. Angelica Alanes comments that discovering Pauper for the first time was the best experience ever. Me and a friend rummaged through some old cards to build 2 Pauper decks just to try it out. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, is that Pauper is a really fun format, and being able to just hunt out any card that was selected as common at any point in time does make it incredibly accommodating to new players.
That actually reminds me of whenever I feel like making an EDH deck. Just a few months ago, I said, you know what, I've got the Firemind. I might as well make a Firemind EDH deck. So I went through just my box of commons, started pulling out red and blue cards that let me draw cards. So Pauper's pretty similar to that, probably even a better use for your commons, since you can play more than just one of them.
Yeah, definitely. So opening more than one in booster packs suddenly doesn't become as much of an issue anymore.
Alright, so the final comment on this article is from Tyler Adams, who says, Tron isn't the only deck that runs Eldrazi. That's in response to George commenting about how really the only Eldrazi worth running is Ulamog's Crusher, but you do have the Tron lands. It's just that it's not, he was saying something about how it's not quite enough to be running Tron. Tyler Adams said that he had seen Red-Green Ramp use Scions just to ramp into a free Ulamog's Crusher, and that is very viable. And Red-Green Ramp with Scions at common rarity is quite powerful.
I never actually considered that. Tron was kind of always my go-to view on any sort of Pauper ramp, so that's quite an interesting comment, and might actually be the start of some kind of warping of the format if people popularize it.
I was looking just through my comments I think yesterday, and I found a box of comments that had rotated out that I hadn't even looked at in a year, and there it was, a bunch of flying heroics that were common, and I thought, that might be fun.
Yeah, again, just cards that you would never consider running in sort of most other constructive formats unless it's casual. To be able to play it in Pauper really, really does make those cards sort of more appealing.
All right, well, that is it for 10-Minute Magic. Thanks for joining me, Joe, and standing in a pinch for me while Ben is on holiday.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
What's the name of the podcast that people can find you at?
I can be found at the Converted Mana Cast on SoundCloud. It's me and just a group of friends who talk about pretty much everything Magic related, but nothing super specific unless it's the new set like Shadows of Innistrad.
Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me at Joe Butcher on Facebook. I put articles up on Manaleak, sort of beginner's guide to certain mechanics. So I've recently done the Madness mechanic that's coming out in Shadows of Innistrad, and then on SoundCloud for my podcast.
You can find me on Twitter as @Joseph_Dunlap. I'm always down to talk about Magic and talk about upcoming articles I'm working on. Alright, until next time, this has been 10 Minute Magic.